Listen up, Democrats. You are fake news. And lies and facts. Save our democracy from right-wing hypocrisy. Keep our integrity. Embrace our diversity. Whatever we're down, we always come back. So listen up, Democrats.
Hello, welcome to Progressive Oregon, a weekly engagement broadcast on progressive issues in Oregon. My name is Larry Taylor, and I'm here with my co-host, Betsy Cunningham. If you would like to ask questions during the show, go to the Uphill Media channel and on YouTube and type in your questions in the chat window. Betsy will relay them to me, and we will do our best to answer them. Today on Progressive Oregon, we're going to start with a summary of recent events. It's been a couple of weeks since we've had a show. Then we're going to talk to Andrew Scott Becker, who is from California. We'll be talking about the differences between the California Democratic Party and the Oregon Democratic Party. And then we'll talk about what happened at the convention recently, because there was some fascinating things that happened down there. Then we'll talk about upcoming events, and then we'll wrap up with a grievance process inside the DPO that we are continuing to work on. So what happened in the past couple of weeks? The legislature is wrapping up its session. It's going to go on for another month or so. But two big bills were passed. One bill was Senate Bill 1049. It trims some PERS benefits. It was very controversial because there were a number of legislators who got elected by pledging that they would not touch the benefits of PERS recipients, and then they ended up doing so. They started taking the vote in the legislature. The speaker did not gavel the results because the vote came up too short. She stopped, had a conversation with two legislators, got them to flip their vote. The vote changed so that the bill passed, and she gavelled it through. Very awkward moments for a number of legislators that had been backed by unions with the promise that they wouldn't touch it, but they went back on their promise. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out during the elections next year. We might see some cracks into the unopposed primary system that we have going on. The other one was much better news. Senate Bill 870 passed. This is the gazillionth time that it had been presented in the Senate. It finally passed the Senate and went to the House, where it already had passed a number of times previously. So Senate Bill 870 is now passed, and Oregon is part of the National Compact, which is an agreement amongst the states that pass it that they will all cast their electoral votes for the winner of the popular vote. We are now Oregon brings us to a total of 196 votes from 16 states. The NPV goes into effect when they hit 270, which is the number of votes it takes to elect the president. So this is really a way of applying the popular vote to the Electoral College without going into the Constitution and replacing the Electoral College itself. It's perfectly constitutional, but unfortunately, we've now been passed by all of the big states, and so it's going to be a heavy slog to get to the balance of the votes we need to pass this. Any questions on the line from that, Betsy? Hearing none, we will now go to our review of the Democratic Party in California. We have our special guest today, Andrew Scott Becker. Welcome, Andrew.
There.
Andrew, first of all, tell us your background, because you have a very interesting hybrid background that makes you the perfect guest for this discussion.
Sure. Well, I used to be involved with the Lane County Democratic Party in Eugene. I was the secretary there for a number of years before I moved down to Sacramento, California. And now I'm the secretary for our county party down here, along with a delegate to the state party, the State Central Committee. Back up in Oregon, I was kind of involved with the State Central Committee, along with the Democratic 4th Congressional District Committee, along with the Young Democrats, Young Oregon Democrats of America group that some friends and I started that was a little short-lived because we started getting more involved with the real party instead.
They keep graduating and going off to real lives. That's really interesting because we must have crossed paths a number of times.
Yeah.
And when I brought you up on Facebook, we had 143 friends in common. So
Yeah.
I felt an immediate affinity to you. So California is much bigger than Oregon, and we're kind of aware of your presence, like Canada is aware of the United States. Could you bring up the slide about the difference between the numbers, John? So California has 58 counties compared to Oregon's 36. So if they have a structure similar to Oregon's, then each of the counties elect the delegates to the state central committee. So it ends up being a much more involved process there. We have trouble keeping up with who's the delegates representing in 36 counties. So that must be a challenge in California.
Yeah. The interesting biggest difference is that the state central committee in California is comprised of 3 groups of delegates. In Oregon, you just have delegates from the county central committee. In California, delegates from the county central committees comprise 1/3 of the state central committee. Another third is elected every 2 years in a caucus-style election held in every assembly district in the state. And so they elect, each assembly district elects 14 people for the state central committee, gender balanced, female and other than female. And then the third kind of leg on the 3-legged stool is the ex officio members. They're basically like mini super delegates. Anybody who is a state legislator, whether an assembly member or a state senator, anybody who is a statewide elected officer, so attorney general, the governor, and anybody who is a member of Congress or whether a representative or a senator. So but that's not quite enough to make up an equal third. And so actually there's appointees that each one of these mini super delegates get. So it's even worse than the DNC. It would be like if the DNC gave all of the super delegates extra political appointees that they could then appoint. So each assembly member gets to appoint 6 people to the state central committee. Each state senator gets to appoint 5. Each congressperson gets to appoint a couple. And there's a couple of extra bulk appointments that the Speaker of the State Assembly, the President Pro Tem of the State Senate, and the Chair of the Democratic Congressional Delegation each get an extra 30 appointees to the State Central Committee. So that breaks down into roughly thirds. About a third of the State Central Committee is appointed from the county parties. About a third is elected through the ADEMs. And about a third is appointed by politicians, the ex officio members.
Well, that must result in an agile organization. How does that work out for you?
Well, so it makes the convention very, very difficult. The State Central Committee meetings are loosely called conventions, and they only happen once a year. There has to be an extra level of the party comparable to the executive committee in the Democratic Party of Oregon, but we call it the executive board. And unlike Oregon, where it's mostly a collection of the officers and some members of the legislature, the executive board for the California Democratic Party is about 330 people. So it's one person elected in the ADEMs from Assembly Democratic caucuses from each assembly district, a couple of people balanced by population from each of the county central committees, and then again the kind of super delegates, the ex officio members. They don't get appointees, extra appointees to the executive board, but the executive board meets a few more times per year, and they basically fulfill kind of the same function as the state central committee does in Oregon, meeting much more frequently and making more decisions. So the State Central Committee has about 3,300 people, and the Executive Board has 330 people.
Wow. And that compares to our State Central Committee, which is 170 if they were all filled. And then you have 53 congressional districts compared to our 5. So even that is just mind-boggling in the logistics it must create.
Well, and they've made it very kind of top-down in certain ways. So in Oregon, you have the congressional district committees, which are able to elect people to the state parties' standing committees, which is a really great system, and don't ever let them get rid of it. Because in California, all of the members of the state standing committees are just appointed by the chair of the state party.
Wow.
So it makes the elections, a lot hangs on who becomes the chair. And then after, we elect a new chair, you have to kind of come grovel to the chair and ask to be put on a standing committee.
Wow, that sounds democratic. I just drop in. Like, please let a commoner join your group.
Right. I mean, one of the big reform platform ideas that we have for internal party reform is to make the appointment to the standing committees much more democratic. It's unlikely that that'll happen given the results of the latest election. But hopefully we'd like to do something that's a little bit more in line with Oregon, where the state party is broken into regions. Each region is a couple of assembly districts smashed together, and the members of each region get to elect a regional director. And so the idea we have is, well, when they're electing a regional director, just let them elect either people to the standing committees directly from their region, or people to a committee that will then make the appointments for all the committees instead of the state chair.
And then the other interesting difference is when it comes to delegates to the Democratic National Convention in 2020, you have 495 delegates that you'll be electing compared to 66 that Oregon will be sending. I remember watching the California delegation sat right across the arena from the Oregon delegation in 2016. And so we could watch your group, which took up an entire slice of the arena. And you had a lot of protests coming out of that. But we think that California was placed there because it's easy then to keep them in the dark and off the camera, because the real objective of the convention is to have a show.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, the convention has become a little pro forma, and in California, it's the same with such a big party. Our state central committee meetings don't really function as a proper parliamentary body more often than not.
Wow.
So this is actually an important convention coming up, because we could show up with 3 candidates, of which none have 50%. And so with your large group of delegates going to the convention, you could be the deciding factor. How?
Yeah.
And we were talking earlier, and you mentioned that you hadn't completed your delegate selection plan, and you actually filed for an extension. How's that plan turning out?
Well, so in the past, California was a very late primary. We didn't have our primary until early July or June. So it's been, I guess, for the past 20 years, it's been our practice to ask for an extension and figure out the delegate selection plan in the middle of the year before convention. We're a little behind schedule even at that. And what's going to make it even more complicated is that now we've advanced our primary. So we're no longer a late primary. We're going to be voting in March. Actually with kind of a staggered implementation of vote by mail. We've got some pilot project counties that are doing an all vote by mail. Sacramento County is one of the counties that has now gone to all vote by mail, but a lot of the counties in California have the style of vote by mail where you have to request it. Other than that, you can go to a polling location. So there's going to be a lot of people who are voting by mail in California right after the Iowa caucuses. And so it makes this year's extension a little complicated because we're going to have to rush to implement it. And there's a lot of steps that are going to just kind of be crunched down into a much narrower time frame than we've had in the past since we advanced our primary. Now, advancing our primary so early did cause us to lose delegates to the Democratic National Convention. The DNC has an equation where they try to limit the number of states that try to go early by giving you more delegates if you go later and less delegates if you go sooner. So we did lose delegates by advancing our primary, but it's going to be crazy to see all of the 23 candidates trying to compete in a really early primary in the most expensive media market.
Do you have any guesses at this point about how the primary is going to turn out?
I stopped doing too much prognosticating when John Kerry lost against Bush. My crystal ball's a little broken sometimes. But, Bernie did all right in California last time. I think, he's still fairly popular here. Kamala Harris has actually been losing steam, I'd say, despite this being her home state. It's interesting that doesn't seem to count for as much as a lot of people thought it was going to. I mean, she locked up so many endorsements right after she announced. Most of the folks in the legislature and the statewide elected officials just endorsed her automatically. But I don't know, the Sacramento Bee is a fairly moderate paper, and one of their political columnists just came out with an editorial kind of blasting her, the lack of enthusiasm for her, despite her kind of good start.
No, I thought it was Kamala country, man. That's why I saw all these signs at the conventions, Kamala country. And then I saw Bernie getting...
They really astroturfed that up to try to play for the home field advantage, but there's just not a lot of enthusiasm. And even at the convention, a lot of people that were somewhat mod Dems were kind of whispering, yeah, there's just not quite as much steam there as we thought it was going to be.
Let's go back to the maps, and let's go to the congressional district map and just sort of impress upon people the difference of scale of California versus California. I try to make these roughly the same scale so you can compare the two. On the right, you see Oregon's 5 congressional districts, of which most of the state is CD2, and then just a tiny piece being CD3, the Portland metro area, versus California, which is almost twice as long as the length of Oregon. And as you can imagine, if you think that CD2 has distance problems getting together, what it is like in California, it's like a major effort for everyone to go to California or to go to San Francisco last weekend like they did.
Yeah, our conventions are, they move them around the state. So every other convention will it'll be north of kind of the midline, and the next one kind of south. Usually they like to hold this recent convention. We were electing a chair, but only because the previous chair resigned in disgrace for sexually abusing some of the staff. So our usual officer elections are right after presidential elections. And they always like to hold those officer elections in Sacramento because delegates to the state Central Committee actually have the ability here to appoint proxies. So if they can't attend or don't really care about it, usually what'll happen is elected officials or political appointees and all these people have the ability to send a proxy to go instead. And so they like to hold officer elections in Sacramento because you've got all of these Capitol staffers here and lobbyists and other kind of schmucks that are a little moderate. And so it's easier for them to stack votes and assign proxies when they hold the convention here, where there's all these people who can kind of be bound in the way that they vote. And, they can kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say, hey, you like your day job? You want to keep it? You could vote this way. And there's a lot of pressure in that regard. First you've got that third of the state central committee that is directly appointed by legislators and other high-level politicians. And so a lot of those people, their votes get bound. The person appointing them kind of instructs them how to vote for officers or endorsements or things like that. And so just structurally, we have a big problem in California with that kind of old school bully mentality. There's a lot of instances where they like to call your boss and kind of rat you out and try to get you in trouble.
That sounds similar. We've got problems with that here. You mentioned the 5 districts for the regionals, or 5 regions, and David Hildebrand was running for the northern vice chair. Here I have this up. When does that happen? Is that November? And how do these? Can you talk about how these regions affect the votes a little more?
Yeah, sure. So David was running, I think, for a different sort of region for the Progressive Caucus.
Okay.
Elections. For the state party, we've got a good number of regions. I think it's 23, somewhere about there, and each region is just a couple of assembly districts put together, and then everybody who is a member of a state central committee from that region, or anybody who lives in the region and is a member of the party of the state central committee by any means. So they could be from a county central committee, they could be from the Assembly Democratic Caucus's elections, or one of the politicians and their appointees. And then every 2 years, we elect a regional director for each region. And so they somewhat fulfill the function of the Democratic congressional committees in Oregon.
Okay.
They're kind of a mid-level in between the counties and the state party, Oregon. But in some regards, they're a little vestigial. They don't really do much. They do a lot of organizing. It's primarily a workhorse position.
Makes sense for David.
Director. So they'll organize the Assembly Democratic Caucus elections, and they'll help organize, for instance, when we have the caucuses for Democratic National Convention delegates, they'll help organize that with the presidential campaigns. It's mostly, it's not like the Democratic congressional committees in Oregon where each one has a chair and a secretary, and they actually participate more in the state party. It does, being a regional director does make you an automatic member of the state executive board, though. So that's nice.
Oh, so there are some. So it's an interesting position of power, and David's a smart guy, so it makes sense for him to run for it. Thank you for explaining that. Appreciate it.
There's a couple of questions in chat. Moose Gal from Illinois, I want to know what type of Dems are in Oregon. Are they neoliberal or progressives? I consider Senator Jeff Merkley a progressive Democrat, and what does Andrew think?
Yeah, I think Merkley is a progressive. Wyden is a little more. He's good on some privacy and internet issues. I think he low-key lives in New York, actually. But on some of the more progressive issues, he's not a solid hitter.
How would you assess the Democrats in general in Oregon, Andrew?
I think that the party is a bit better on the whole than it is here in California. In Oregon, you don't have the political appointees from the ex officio members, the kind of mini super delegate. And so that really, I think, makes the difference. Down here, they have a very moderating effect on the state party. And you can look at it, the results of elections. So the DNC prohibits secret ballots. And so when you look at, say, the last officer elections, you can calculate exactly which third of each kind of membership position, how they voted as a group. The ex officios and their appointees voted heavily for the more moderate candidate, Eric Bauman, 2 years ago. The Assembly Democrat, the ADEMs, they call them, the ones elected by the Assembly caucuses, voted heavily for the more progressive candidate, Kimberly Ellis. And the appointees from the Central Committee, Central Committees, they split about even.
If you're going to go into that, and I'd like you to, and then maybe talk about Maria Estrada, Rusty Hicks wasn't even a name. And then all of a sudden he was dropped in. And I don't know. Rusty reminds me of Tom Perez. Just going to say that. What happened there? I mean, do you think the election was above board? The elections were above board in the ADEM convention?
So, no, not all of them were. We heard a lot of stories. The ones here in Sacramento, we've got a really great regional director who is extremely progressive, and he was a big Bernie guy who did a lot to organize on the Bernie campaign in 2016. He's been around the party for a long time here.
Awesome.
Eric Sunderland, he does a good job and make sure that everybody is actually registered to vote as a Democrat, and there's no funny business going on. In other places, and here in Sacramento, the progressive slates kind of swept the Assembly Democratic Caucus elections. In other places, though, you have a lot of legislators. So even though the legislators, get all these, they're automatic appointees to the State Central Committee, and they get extra appointees, they try to double dip and run slates for the Assembly caucuses. So in San Francisco, you had one district where an Assembly member was busing people in, and they'll give them free food. They'll host a big breakfast and then bus them to the caucus location. In one Assembly district, you had people that somehow managed to show up with copies of a ballot already pre-marked and drop them off. You had down in LA, you had people who were being paid to vote. They would come up to the caucus volunteers and say, where do I get the money for coming to vote? And it's kind of a mess. There's no rules governing it. It's literally allowed, or not prohibited in the bylaws of the party, to pay people to come vote for the candidate that you want. It's ridiculous, and there really needs to be some reform of it. But how much reform there will be remains to be seen, because these legislative slates help make the difference in the chair's election. And so that's how you got elected chair. How much are you going to reform it? Rusty did kind of come out of nowhere. He's been the director of the LA Labor Federation for a couple of years, but before that, he was a Capitol staffer for almost 2 decades. And so that's really, he was painted. They did this kind of identity politics about unions, and we got to support unions, and if you don't vote for Rusty, you hate unions. But he kind of dropped in out of nowhere. He wasn't even a member of a Democratic club until this year when he started running for chair. He had been a member of the LA County Party, but he didn't even come to state conventions before. He would just send a proxy. Nice. And he kind of inherited all of the support that the previous chair, Eric Bauman, had, plus an extra group of support from some of the union members in the state party. So that really complicated the progressive kind of path to victory by taking away a big chunk of people that had voted for the more progressive candidate in the previous election in 2017.
Yeah, that's what it looked like to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Eric Bauman, I mean, was a Capitol staffer for a long time, and that's where a lot of his institutional support came from. He was the highest paid staffer in the assembly for a couple of years until he got elected chair of the California Democratic Party. And he just had kind of a Tammany Hall kind of machine running down in LA. And so Rusty Hicks inherited all of that, kind of came out of nowhere, but with the institutional support from his Capitol staff buddies, and then the extra bump he got from the kind of identity politics campaign they ran with unions and his
right.
short stint as a union director.
Friend of labor.
That pushed him over the edge.
You should. I just want to run this for everybody. This is John Graziano confronted Rusty about the corruption in the convention and asked him specifically what he's going to do about it. This is John. There's no sound. I just want you to look at Rusty's reaction when John tells him, "I'm an independent reporter." Okay. Do you see that side eye right there? He looked at his handler and said, "This guy's nobody." And then he basically said, "Here's our plan. Here's our plan. It's all in the plan. We got to go now. Thank you. Here's our 100-day plan. We got to go." That was Rusty responding. So Rusty absolutely knows how to address that's why he's totally the slick suit that we did not want winning, in my view.
Yeah, he came in, without a platform whatsoever. He had a lot of platitudes about, obviously since our former chair resigned in disgrace for sexual harassment, his platform was sexual harassment is bad and we should do something about it. And when asked about any other problems and institutional reforms within the party, all he would say is, winning campaigns is good, Trump is bad, and specific reform, we're going to make a committee to think about that.
Right. And on Twitter, there was an actual response. He was having a battle with Maria Estrada. And he said, there was basically, it came across, there wasn't enough cheating to matter. People won, they cheated to win, but it really wasn't enough. And then, and you cheated too, that was basically. So, it seems like the California Democratic Party admits to the problems, admits to cheating, but says, but we're not really going to do anything about it. Is that your take?
In a lot of regards, there is a lot of support for reform, but even people that voted for Rusty would like some reforms from what we have now. But now that Rusty is elected, we'll see if any of that is able to come to fruition. Because if structural problems benefited you, then how much are you going to do about it? I don't know. Right.
That's kind of what I thought. Larry, I'll let it back to you. My question, for both of you, is what do they do in California? I've seen what you've done, what we've done in Oregon to inform the SEC, but wow, California is so much bigger. Can the same thing be done? Right.
So I watched the video that was uploaded of the Oregon State Central Committee meeting in early May, and that was beautiful to watch. We tried to do things from the floor of the State Central Committee meeting that we just had in California, and they just take the microphones away, or first off, they just don't turn them on, so you can't say anything.
Wow.
And then, when we were standing there very patiently trying to make a motion, and when they failed to recognize our motion, trying to make a point of order that they failed to recognize our wish to speak, then they just took the microphones away. So, we went up to the stage and tried raising our credentials and shouting in between speakers, point of order, and,
unbelievable.
The chair, the acting chair, our vice chair, Alex Rooker, would just look and smile and then look away.
Nice. Vice chairs. I've lost a lot of respect for that concept recently. Not really sure what they're doing. Well, I mean, that's just amazing. So when they need to, they just strong arm. And what is Robert's? I'm sure there's no provision in Robert's rules for when they just physically stop you from doing democracy. You know?
Yeah. I mean, what we're going to have to do next time, I've got, I know the State Rules Committee chair a little bit, and so I've been talking with him offline about some of those problems.
Right.
And so we'll see if hopefully they'll get a little bit better, but I'm not going to put any faith in that. So what we're going to have to do in the future is just go up when they do have the microphones on, because they do have the microphones on for a limited time when they're discussing resolutions. If you want a resolution pulled from the consent calendar, then they do have the microphones turned on for a limited amount of time in order to do that. So we'll just have to go up to the microphones when that is going on and ask to dismiss with the orders of the day to introduce something else.
I agree. I also think you could just try a little of their method and just buy off the sound person. Yeah.
Betsy, you said that there were other questions?
Yeah, there was a question not on this topic. Nicholas Royal wanted to know if you think too much money is spent on political campaigns.
Yeah. And not just, so in California with the Assembly Democratic caucuses, these legislators are able to use campaign funds to basically steamroll the grassroots. I mean, the reason these caucuses were created is to enable the grassroots an avenue, if they're being blocked through their central committee from getting on the state party, or, they're not being appointed by their local legislator who's, maybe a mod dem. These caucuses are supposed to enable the grassroots to have a more accessible venue to have an input in the state party. But when you've got legislators running their own slates of mods, then that just kind of makes it difficult. In Sacramento County, these grassroots progressive slates swept the elections. But, in a lot of places, even some very blue areas like San Francisco, parts of San Francisco and LA, legislators spent a ton of money, ran their own slates, and kind of took those seats away from the grassroots, even though they already have, a third of the state central committee that they appoint directly.
Was there any other questions, Betsy?
No.
So the delegate selection plan is interesting. I heard that previously California had used a plurality system for electing the delegates to go to the convention. Because the conventions have been pro forma, and we've for decades we've always entered the convention with a majority. It didn't really matter who showed up to cast their vote, because the vote on the first ballot was the one that took. But with 2020 coming up, with the possibility of no one entering the convention with a majority, suddenly who goes to the convention makes a big difference. So what is the status of plurality voting in California, and is there discussion to do something different?
There's a little bit of discussion. So, we've got a chat group. A lot of people in kind of the progressive side of the party have been chatting a little bit about maybe going to some sort of ranked choice or something. There's not a ton of steam behind it, but yeah, our delegate selection plan is a little bit messed up. We've asked for an extension and got it from the Democratic National Committee's Rules and Bylaws Committee. So we don't even have a draft yet, much less any solid dates for anything. It's going to be interesting to see what they come up with. It probably won't change a lot. I was reading the Oregon plan and the previous California plan, and they're not too dissimilar. A lot of it seems like form language that they must get from the DNC. But yeah, it is interesting that California uses just the kind of standard default language. Now, it is interesting that, yeah, you can get elected with only a plurality here. I went to the convention from Oregon in 2012, and it was interesting to see that process work here or there. And I would like to, do a second round of balloting instead of just having a plurality vote. But, given that we can't even make motions from the floor in our own state party, I don't know how likely it is to change.
And if you were in North Dakota with like 3 delegates or whatever they have going, it wouldn't really make that much difference. But with 495 votes at the convention, that's actually a big deal.
Sure. And, one of the weird things is that we used to have our delegate selection caucuses from the congressional districts before the primary. And I think they're finally going to change that this year with such a crowded field so that they actually know how many delegates each candidate will get, so that they don't have to organize, 23 different caucuses in every congressional district for all the candidates who won't even get 15% of the vote. So.
I want to jump in real quick on this and just I want to clarify something here that the national level, because I'm seeing a comment from Pat Hacker about neither party is using ranked choice voting, so it's not really an option in 2020. But there's differences, right? Because parties at the state level can make different decisions, right? You guys could choose and vote to use ranked choice or star or some other kind. We're not locked to what the DNC at the national level chooses, right?
Sure. Well, and there's a difference between what we use in our own internal caucuses. So we could very easily choose to use ranked choice voting when we're electing the delegates from each congressional district to the national convention. It would get more difficult if we tried to convince the legislature to change the actual public primary.
There's a question from Sarah Wolk about, has star voting been part of the conversation for California as an upgrade for RCV?
Nobody that I've really talked with in California knows anything about star voting, and I've really only heard of it because of my friends still up in Oregon.
And just to be clear about what the DNC does say about voting methodologies for delegates, they don't specify it, but they also don't discourage the use of plurality voting, which is why you see plurality voting occurring. And as I mentioned earlier, because the convention's winner has been predetermined, it really didn't matter who you sent to the convention because they're all bound by their vote, and their vote is cast in the first round. And so, things work out generally as expected. The difference this time is that when you get to the second round of voting, everyone is then free to vote for whoever they want. Mm-hmm. So the thing about where plurality voting came from, I checked with a member of the Rules Committee, and he verified that, yeah, the Rules Committee didn't specify or disallow or recommend plurality voting. And it seems to have come from the ASDC, where the staffers of the party go, and someone at a meeting of the staffers said, "Oh yeah, you want to use ranked choice, or you want to use plurality voting because you get everything done with one round of voting, and you don't have to mess around with a lot of democracy stuff." So it didn't come from the DNC.
Democracy.
Yeah, it came from a separate organization, and so these things get out there and start being presented as facts, and then everyone thinks they're truisms when they're really not. They're actually, things stated possibly in ignorance with the best intentions, but they end up being baked into things like the delegate selection plan.
Well, that's why it's important to know the rules.
Yes. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about on the convention? We talked a little bit about what happened. When we were actually fairly good at credentialing up here. It sounds like credentialing in San Francisco was loose.
Yeah, sometimes it's a real mess, and just by coincidence, the mess always seems to work out in favor of the more moderate candidate. The previous convention where we elected Eric Bauman in 2017, we saw a lot of problems with one legislator managed to turn in his ballot despite not being there. We had all sorts of things where proxies were inappropriately appointed to people. There are some rules governing proxies for some of the delegates. If you come from a county central committee, your proxy has to actually live in the same county that you do. If you're an Assembly Democratic caucus delegate, then your proxy has to be from your assembly district. There's somewhat less rules for the assembly members and the state senators, but theoretically their proxies are supposed to come from the political body that they represent, the district that they represent. But there's a lot of times when they seem to play loose and fast with the rules, and more outside the structure. We see sometimes some of the more conservative unions who are supporting a moderate candidate. They will, if they have union members who happen to also be state party members, then they will pay for their airfare and their hotel to go to convention. But they'll say, hey, if you want this, you got to vote the way that we tell you to, whether that be in the officer elections or in endorsements. And so, we have a lot of people who, are reasonably progressive who will say, when we try to, ask for their vote for this or that, I'd like to, but I'm sorry, my union will take away my hotel and my airfare if I don't vote how they tell me to.
So you have problems with credentialing, and you have problems with voting, and you have problems in debate. Is there anything that works well in the California party meetings?
Oh, we've got the best platitudes.
John, I just got a question for you. John asked Rusty if they were going to implement PDI. What is he talking about there?
So I think that's referring to Political Data Incorporated. So California, the Democratic Party here doesn't use Vote Builder, the proprietary Democratic Party voter file. Instead, it uses PDI, and PDI is basically a private for-profit company. It sells its information to Democrats and Republicans and independents and lobbyists and anybody who wants to buy it. It's a lot more expensive and not really better or more useful, especially when you get down to election day. It lags a lot, and it'll just freeze and kick you off. It becomes impossible to cut turf. But the people that founded it were buddies with a lot of the officers of the party at the time that the party adopted it as the voter file that the California Democratic Party uses. So it's kind of strange. Now it's funny because when presidential candidates come in, or the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, they use the DNC's software voter file. But for assembly races and things like that, local stuff, the voter file that the state party gives counties and candidates access to is PDI instead.
So are they saying they need to get rid of that because it's causing discrepancies? Is that the...
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult. You've got staffers who maybe want to work on they might have experience working on a legislative race, but if they want to work on a presidential race, they have no clue how to use Vote Builder because they're only used to PDI. Or the other way around. You have somebody that, maybe who worked on a congressional race with the CCCC, or somebody else was helping to fund, and so they're familiar with Vote Builder, and they try to work on a local race, and they're like, what the hell is this?
Yeah. All right. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Anything else you'd like to share about the convention that went on last weekend?
It's incredibly pro forma. The agenda that they send out is just basically a list of times when the caucuses meet and the committees, standing committees meet, and then like hours and hours of speeches from this year, a lot of presidential candidates. Usually it's just, free air time for the statewide elected officials and some assembly members and things like that. It just kind of drones on. There's not a lot of participatory democracy. So a lot of times the general session is fairly useless. It's just a bunch of speeches.
Like you said, Larry, a show. A nice show. How do we change that? I mean, I know how Larry's changed it here. How do you think California changes that? What would you do to change that as grassroots?
So there hasn't. So we've started a broader discussion about the bylaws and trying to build momentum for specific changes. There's a lot of gripes about specific problems that the state party has, but not always a clear direction of how to move forward. And so we're going to try to use the Progressive Caucus because, one of the problems is, everybody says, this and that is bad, but everybody has, 3 different ideas about how to fix this or that. So we're going to try to build more consensus for specific reforms. That way we've got a more unified voice in what we'd like to do when we're actually trying to advocate for some of these changes. So that way we won't just be going to, maybe the Rules Committee and saying, oh, this is bad, fix it somehow. But, all right, these are the things that you actually need to fix that would make this organization better and more democratic.
Nice. Thank you.
Certainly the appointment by the chair, if you could change that around, that would make a huge difference. The DNC is the same way. The chair has, from what I can tell, complete authority over who gets appointed to the standing committees. And right now it stands at 31 people, most of them that reside on the East Coast. And it's not really clear how you get into an appointment of the Rules Committee. But it's probably the same thing you mentioned earlier. You got to, become besties with the chair of the DNC, and then maybe you'll get in.
Yeah, our state party vice chair, Alex Rooker, is actually on the DNC's Rules and Bylaws Committee. She doesn't always go. Sometimes she sends a proxy. But yeah, it's I would say that the kind of Dem-Enter movement has been really healthy for the California Democratic Party because there's a lot more resistance where before people were just kind of laying over and letting all this stuff happen. They were letting the party become more top-down, more pro forma, and kind of eliminate the participatory element of it. But now there are a lot of more people who are actually engaged and have a reform agenda, who are coming into the party and really shaking things up. And it's a longer term struggle, but I think that we're seeing some good fruits of it already.
And we have a parallel effort up here. So far, the new people have stuck with it and have not abandoned it because of their poor treatment by the establishment, and they're hell-bent on taking back what they consider their party.
Sure. Yeah.
So there's reason for hope.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like?
That's why I love the series that you've done about Robert's Rules of Order. It's a lot of people consider this kind of stuff boring, but really it's one of the best tools that you can have when you're trying to come into the party and reform it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything else you would like to add in closing?
No, just thanks for having me on, and keep up the good work. I think it's really important that we disseminate more information like this to the people who are interested in shaking up the party.
And thank you for sharing. It's been illuminating to me.
It's been incredible. And Andrew, I just want to thank you for saying what you just said about appreciating Robert's rules. I mean, when we started that series, I think it got 20, 30 views live each. And, now the main one on just doing agendas is got like 2,000 views, which is pretty much, it's a lot for, Robert's rules stuff. And I think if there's one lesson we learned as a small independent network, it's that you need to reach the audience that matters. So we targeted the SCC. You know what I mean?
Sure.
That's the people that needed to be informed. And thank you for the work you do, because this is the nuts and bolts of democracy that needs to be done, and nobody pays attention to it in the larger indie media spectrum.
Right. Yeah. No, the the media is pretty silent on a lot of the nuts and bolts of what actually goes on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, both of you. What a fantastic conversation, and what a great audience. Lots of great guests.
Thank you, Andrew. We're going to have you back on soon.
Great. Thank you very much.
What's next, Larry?
Upcoming events. So the May 19th State Central Committee meeting, if you remember, started at 1:15, or if you heard, started at 1:15. We got to approval of the agenda around 5 o'clock that afternoon, which means that there's a lot of business that still has to be accomplished. There was a motion made to have a continuation of the meeting, and so that's now been scheduled for June 18th, which is the last possible day within the 30-day time frame that had been given. It's been called an emergency meeting for some reason, which allows them to make it electronic, and so it's going to be a very difficult meeting to participate in. But that's happening on June 18th, which is a Tuesday night. The other thing that's happening is that the Oregon delegate selection plan is now under review by the Democratic National Committee, and they're going to come back it's this month, I guess, when they're going to respond with either it's great, or there's a few things we need fixed, or you need to start over. So it'll be very interesting to see how they respond, because there was an enormous amount of feedback that was submitted from the public with that plan that was not acted upon by the committee who wrote it. Interestingly, the Elections Integrity Caucus met last month, and they reviewed the different methods of voting, and they have come out adamantly opposed to plurality voting, and will be doing their utmost best to try to get that changed, at least in the Oregon delegate selection plan. Finally, we do have a grievance process within the DPO that's not adopted by the DPO, but we have people who know how to lodge grievances, and we have to stop tolerating the kind of behavior that's been exhibited towards the members of the party, calling people names, sending out emails, blasting their character, and just poor treatment has got to stop. And there is no reason why people should act other than professional to each other. So if you have experience with being treated poorly by any officer within the Democratic Party, and that's both at the state and the county level, we would appreciate it if you would go to pdpo.org and report it, and then we will get back to you on how to get it rectified, because this is the kind of behavior that people who show up at the party wanting to do good see, and they walk away in complete disgust, because no one wants to spend their personal lives being treated as poorly as we have treated so many people in the past. This is going to end, and we're going to make the Democratic Party a happy place to be. As Adam was mentioning, if you would like to see the videos that he talked about, there's around 21 of them now. They are at advancementofdemocracy.org, and it's on the videos tab, and you can pop yourself some popcorn and pull them up and watch and binge watch them if you'd like. And we've tried to cover all of the major topics that are within Robert's Rules of Order. If you would like to get involved with the Oregon for Bernie campaign, the website to go to is oregonforbernie.org. We have a number of things that you can do there. most importantly, we would like to have your contact information, because the campaigns collect it, but seem to be reluctant to share it out. We really need to, if we're going to have a revolution here in Oregon, we really need to know who our revolutionaries are. We need people in some specific counties where we do not currently have representation. So if you, or if people you know would like to reform the Democratic Party and get Bernie Sanders elected, please come to that website and register. We are especially looking for candidates, or for activists from Umatilla County, Hood River County, Wasco, Marion, Deschutes, and Jefferson counties. And we are especially welcoming to Native Americans and Hispanics, two groups of people that look at how we treat each other inside the Democratic Party and say, I don't want to be a part of this. We will ensure that you have a better experience. On the OregonForBernie.org site is a number of things that you can do. Please show the next slide, John. We have 3 GoFundMe projects going, and if everyone would kick in, the cost of a couple of lattes, we would most appreciate it. We have a GoFundMe that will be distributing bumper stickers around the state. We have a GoFundMe for placing signs around the state. If you go to the next slide, and you can show examples of what we are doing. What we would like to do is get 100 signs posted around Oregon. It only costs $27 in materials for one of these. We have an awesome sign artist who is producing them, and each one is custom. And this is a great way to make sure that Bernie Sanders wins the Oregon primary. So if you would like to sponsor a sign, please go to the GoFundMe button on OregonForBernie.org and chip in $27 and buy yourself a sign. We want to do bumper stickers, and if we could just get 300 donations of $10 a piece, we will print them up and then distribute them for free through the Bernie Sanders groups. And finally, the third GoFundMe is critically important because there is less than a month between the election of our last delegates from Oregon and the beginning of the 2020 convention, which means that unlike last time, there will be very little time for personal fundraising. And so what we're doing is that we have set up a GoFundMe, and we will be distributing the money to the Sanders delegates to get elected next June. So we need to raise a lot of money, just because we're estimating we'll have around 30 delegates to send. We are going to be buying airline flights late because of the late date. We are forced to stay in specific hotels. They tend to be expensive hotels, so you can't really go do a Airbnb and share it with 15 people. To really be an effective participant in the convention, you need to stay at the hotel. All of these costs are paid for by the delegates or by money that we collect. And we do not want the cost of attending a convention to prevent anyone from participating. You should also be aware of some awesome Bernie products that's on the next slide. So if you go to the merch and contribute page of OregonForBernie.org, you can buy things from 2 sources. There's Two Chicks Conspiracy that have a really great multicolor Bernie t-shirt. And then we have a number of products that we've developed through Uphill Media that you can also get. And this is really important coming up in the summer, because many of you will be attending parades, maybe even marching in parades. And we would like everyone to get your Bernie gear. Some of the stuff takes a week to get delivered, and so you need to be ordering the stuff now so that you'll have it in time for at least the July 4th parades and then any other events this summer. So go to OregonForBernie.org, the merch tab, and get your Bernie swag. Other things going on, it's now June, and shortly we will be starting a show called ParliamentaryTalk.org. This is where we will take people's problems that they've encountered in their neighborhood associations or their HOAs or possibly even their local political party. And we will be nonpartisan in this. But we would love to hear your challenges. Andrew had some good ones, like They won't let us speak. What do we do? And so what we will do is discuss your challenges that you present us and give you guidance on using the rules of order and parliamentary procedure and possibly bylaws that govern whatever association you're discussing. Give you guidance on how to navigate it and get your rights asserted. You can sign up for a subscription to notices of when are going to have these shows. They will also be recorded, so you can go back and watch previous shows if you want. And then if you would actually like to study parliamentary procedure, we have a virtual study group that's a chartered group within the National Association of Parliamentarians. We are actually now the largest group inside of Oregon, I believe, with 11 members, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it actually is, which many are the younger, newer generation. We would be delighted if you would come join the group and study. We can help you pass the exams and get whatever level of registration within the National Association of Parliamentarians you wish. If you'd like to get notifications of this show, you can go to the site advancementofdemocracy.org and receive notifications of when we have these shows. We usually broadcast them on Sunday mornings at 10, but depending what's going on, sometimes we do skip a show. That's it for our show today. John, would you like to add anything? Or Betsy, did we have any final comments on the line?
I don't know if there's any. Everybody thought it was an excellent show. Good job. Really, really well. Thank you, Laura Livengood, who joined us this morning, and Dewey and Schulte. Glad you guys learned a bunch. Yeah. Betsy, I didn't see any questions. I don't know if you're...
I might have lost track.
All right, well done. All right. No, I think that's... I realized I'm all, for some reason, I'm really short in my camera. That's going to go on screen. No, we're good, Larry. We're going to... I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. Because you realize that your donations, the people that are donating to this little media network, your donations made it possible for the exposure of the DPO and for us to do these communications, bridge the knowledge together between the different states. And it shows that you don't have to have $20 million or somebody else's money to be an independent network that can accomplish things, right? You can do it with very little and just a group of friends that work together and help inform the right people what they need to know. And so I just want to say thank you, because you made that possible, right? And
I would think that Californians after this show would be showing up with their pitchforks and torches at the Democratic Party meetings to get some reforms changed, because what's going on in California is really not tolerable.
No, it's a total. It's just. I mean, if you think I thought Oregon is bad. No, we're doing okay, but we're also way smaller. You know, it's an easier beast to tame, it seems. Good work, everybody. That's what I really want to say is good work. We never would have done this stuff in 2016, 2017. We weren't even there, you know. So that's all. We're going out with a song called "Break the Cycle" by Star Sailor, which is pretty. It's pretty self-explanatory. Listen to the words, and the only way to break the cycle on this bullshit is to stand up and demand that they follow the rules, or demand that our rights are asserted. And at some point, if they're really literally turning off the mics or taking them away, man, I mean, that just gets. We have to assert our power so that we're not dealing with that as much, right? So, thank you all for being here, and we'll see you. So we got a show coming up with Rick Shepard, except I can't remember the day it is, but look for it on We the People. So join us for that. Thanks. Thank you, Al, for $5. Really appreciate that. Appreciate that, Oz. Bye, everybody. Star Sailor, break the silence.
Running out of war to fight. And all we can afford is to rip up all our plans and live our lives. She's coming out left. She's coming out left tonight. You will be the last. Cut me like you do when we hide. If we break the cycle, then we break the chain. Too much sun, not enough rain. Found somebody, I don't have to explain myself. Running out of words, I'm running out of words to write. There's too much joy and pain to run out on our name and leave behind. If we break the cycle, then we break the chain. Too much sun, not enough rain. Found somebody, I don't have to explain myself. When you do what you do, what you do. When you do what you do, what you do. Why'd you do it like that? Why'd you do it like that? When you do what you do, what you do. When you do what you do, what you do. Why'd you do it like that? Why'd you do it like that?